Welcome and good afternoon. We would like to get started. Thank you for joining our K-State Garden Hour series hosted by K-State Research and Extension. My name is Lauren Fick and I am the Horticulture Extension Agent for the Cottonwood District. We are very pleased with the success of this webinar series. It appears Kansas loves gardening. We started out with a Zoom room for 500 and this began to fill quickly, so we increased our Zoom license to include up to 1,000 participants. So again, thank you all for joining. We truly appreciate it. This webinar series was founded out of a need to continue to provide extension educated related to horticulture and gardening. Everyone involved in this development of this series is an extension professional for K-State. Most of us have a background in horticultural education or a related discipline, but most of all, we each have a love for gardening and the natural environment. Each week, we will have a new topic related to gardening and horticulture. Our goal is to meet the needs of new gardeners as well as seasoned gardeners. You can find additional topics at our website, which our moderator will post in the comments. I'll have our moderator send this link over, and you can find our upcoming topics on that website page. We have also been posting our events to the K-State Horticulture and Natural Resources Facebook page. This will also be linked in the comments, so be sure to like, share, and use the hashtag K-State Garden Hour to help us promote this new series. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping notes. You will have noticed you are unable to mute your mic. We did that for a purpose. We would like to keep your mics muted during this presentation so there are no disruptions. This will also help to eliminate background noise. As you can see, we do have a lot of participants today. We want to ensure everyone has the best experience possible. With that being said, please keep your videos off. If you do not turn your video off, we will manually turn it off for you. If you need help with that, please just let us know. This can help with the overall internet, broadband, and connectivity so that, again, there are no disruptions during the presentation. As previously mentioned, we have a moderator today. Our moderator is Jason Graves, who is the horticulture agent for the Central Kansas District. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please send them over the chat. There is the ability to send them privately to our moderator if you do not want your questions to be public. Jason will be keeping track of the questions that come in, and we will have an optional Q&A session at the end of our speaker's presentation. We will do our best to get through all of the questions, but in the event that we do not answer all of them, we will upload a question and answer document on the K-State H&R website. Again, Jason will put that link in the chat box. If there is something you missed during the presentation, don't fret. We will be emailing you a link to the recorded session, which should be up by tomorrow. Also in that email is a link for the evaluation, so please fill it out so we can know what topics you guys want to learn about or what we did well or what we can still work on. So let's get started with our webinar series today. I am pleased to introduce our topic, which is indoor plants for health and happiness. Our speaker is Ariel Whitely-Noll from Shawnee County. She has been with K-State Research and Extension for 3 years, and she specializes in indoor plants, vegetable gardening, and the Master Gardener program. Today, Ariel will be talking about the benefits, common species, and care of indoor plants. Thank you, Ariel, for speaking today. We look forward to your presentation. She will get started in just a few moments, so please be patient with us.
Thank you, Lauren. So as Lauren said, my name is Ariel Whitely-Noll. I am the horticulture agent for K-State Research and Extension in Shawnee County. And today we're going to be talking about indoor plants. I am so excited that you guys have decided to join us today and that you're interested in indoor plants. In my life, I think there are two kinds of people when it comes to indoor plants. There are people that do not have plants in their home or their office or their classroom if you're a teacher, maybe because they're not sure how to take care of them or they haven't had success in the past. And then there are people that have plants, but they very clearly don't have enough, which is probably all the rest of us on this webinar. I just don't think that there are enough indoor plants to ever totally fill a space. So today we're going to talk about a little bit more about how to care for them and what kinds of plants you should have. So before we get started, I do just want to mention that Kansas State University is an affirmative action equal opportunity employer. We do give our programs and materials to everyone without regard for race, color, national origin, sex, gender identity, religion, age, height, weight, disability, political beliefs, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, or veteran status. So we want to make sure to mention that. So our objectives today are to understand the benefits of indoor plants in our home, our work, and then other environments. We also want to learn how to select indoor plants to purchase, to understand the culture and care of indoor plants, and then of course to learn about specific types of houseplants, their unique characteristics, and how to care for them. So are indoor plants outdated or trendy? And this is a conversation I have with people a lot. The reason being, when I first created this presentation and I went to see what does K-State Research and Extension, what do other extension universities have as far as information on indoor plants, this was the graphic that I found. So this is actually an image I got from a K-State publication that is online. And I thought it was hilarious because it has like this one lone iris and then this like very sort of 1970s maybe family. I'm basing it off of the cardigan and the hairstyle of the wife. I'm not totally sure how old it is, but in spite of how hilarious I think this graphic is, the information is still really good, which is that plants are giving off very beneficial things like oxygen, trace organic chemicals, and they're taking things from our environment that we don't want, carbon dioxide and other negative trace organic chemicals. So while sometimes, you know, people think that, I think 1970s sometimes when you think about a lot of indoor plants, and that was when a lot of the research was actually going on for how plants benefit us. NASA did some really famous research studies around that time regarding plants in our indoor environments. So sometimes it's easy to think that it's sort of an old thing or outdated, but indoor plants can be really neat. They can definitely be trendy, even if maybe your home style is a little bit retro. They definitely have a place in our home, in our offices, and for me personally, a space is just not complete unless it has indoor plants. I know with COVID, another extension specialist, Cheryl Boyer, mentioned, hey guys, don't forget to take your plants home if you're going to be working from home for the next few weeks. And I was so glad she said that because my office was full of plants. And so I spent 2 days boxing up plants and taking them home. So now that I'm back working in the office again, I was really sad when I came into my office and there weren't any plants in here. So I very quickly was able to fill my space back up with plants. So why should you have indoor plants at home? Of course, they're beautiful and they add to the decor, and we'll talk about that. But there's some really important research that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. Plants in your bedroom actually help you sleep. The reason being, they reduce dust, they can reduce some toxins. 1% of plants in a room can reduce formaldehyde by 6 to 7%. And some of you may be aware that a lot of the products that we purchase that are newly manufactured, furniture, paintings, bed frames, things like that, they're all treated with formaldehyde as part of their finishing process. And they give off small amounts of formaldehyde in our homes, which of course is not what we want. So plants can actually reduce that. They can reduce symptoms of fatigue, headache, cough, and dry skin. Plant-filled rooms contain up to 60% fewer airborne molds and bacteria than rooms without plants. So definitely in your bedroom, one plant is great. One big plant like this would be wonderful, but multiple plants is when you're going to see an improvement in your sleep quality. You're going to notice yourself waking up less. It's just overall beneficial. So in your home, plants can really help encourage time reflection. I always like to have a couple of plants around that, you know, some plants have leaves that tilt a little bit towards the sun or that close up at night and open during the day. I think they encourage time reflection because some plants wilt a little bit and they remind us that they need to be watered. But just having living organisms around us, very similar to benefits of pets, plants can really help us with that time reflection. Plants are very sentimental and memory provoking. I know my mom always had certain types of house plants around. And so I found that when I was on my own, the first thing I did was to sort of fill my space with some of those same plants that my mom had. Pothos is one that she always had around. And while her type of pothos I thought was a little boring, I like to get my own neon pothos or marble queen and just kind of spice it up. But still, it was that sentiment that I'm having the same sort of plants that I grew up with in my home. They can create feelings of happiness, and there's actually research that shows that having plants create those feelings of happiness. And then they can simulate a physiological and a psychological relaxation response. And again, there's research that shows that these are the impacts that plants have on us. So with that kind of research, I don't know why we all wouldn't have plants in our home. But what's probably most impressive, and if you are an employer, definitely pay attention. If you're in the workforce, this is a way that you can improve your own job satisfaction. Put plants in your office. It's going to decrease your employee sick time. Just like in the bedroom, it's going to reduce feelings of fatigue. Plants can take out some of those toxins that can weigh us down after a while. It increases your creativity and your comfort and your memory and concentration. And that's just crazy to me. There's actual research that shows that plants can increase employee screen time, the amount of time that we can look at our computers without getting distracted or getting headaches. Plants can help us with that. People in offices with plants and windows have an increased job satisfaction and report a higher quality of life. So plants and a window in your office, and you have a higher quality of life, which is a really powerful way that plants impact us. And then a couple of other ways that plants can impact our spaces. Students are up to 70% more attentive if there are plants in their classrooms. Of course, there's been a lot of research about green play spaces and the effects on children with ADD, which is that it can decrease the severity of those symptoms. And then in a college setting where students have the choice about whether or not they come back to a classroom, students were almost 100% more likely to return to a classroom if it had plants in it. Classrooms with plants improve test scores by 10%. And then if you know someone who's not doing well, perhaps hospitalized, it can actually increase their recovery time. They have fewer pain medications, lower blood pressure, and higher recovery satisfaction if they have a plant in their hospital room. So it's a really powerful way that indoor plants are impacting us. So I'm going to mention this resource a couple of times, but the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture is a really great resource that has a lot of research-based information about how plants are important. They talk about plants outside your home, plants in our parks, how they're important. But this graphic I just wanted to touch on really quickly because it's all about how plants impact us inside our homes. And these are all statistics that I mentioned earlier, but definitely if you haven't already, check out the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture, as a lot of that information, if you have somebody in your life that isn't totally convinced that plants are needed in every aspect of our life, this is a great resource. So when you're buying indoor plants, it's a little bit different than shopping for other plants. So when you're thinking about where you want to purchase your indoor plants, there's a few places that you can find them. Big box stores is a really common place that I have a lot of people asking or telling me about that they've found certain plants there. A huge advantage of big box stores is they can get really cool kinds of plants or maybe plants that are difficult to find elsewhere. Most of us have a big box store either in our community or within a certain drive of our community where we may not have some of these other types of stores. But a huge disadvantage to shopping for indoor plants, specifically in a big box store, is they typically don't have a trained horticulturalist on their staff. So prior to coming to Extension, I worked for a greenhouse and we supplied a few big box stores with indoor plants specifically. And the big disadvantage that I saw on the greenhouse end is we would ship a semi-truck full of indoor plants. Those plants would go to the store, they would stay there for 2 to 3 weeks, and then we would receive the shipment back. And whatever didn't sell came back to us and it was dead. It wasn't watered, it didn't have enough light. There was just nobody to care for them. That's not how those stores are set up. So it's not that you shouldn't buy things from big box stores, but if you do, you just need to make sure what you're purchasing is a fresh, healthy plant and not something that's been sitting on the shelf for a few weeks without any sort of care. The next place that you can buy indoor plants would be the florist. This can be a really great option because typically our florists do have some kind of horticultural training. They're going to be caring for those plants, and a lot of times our florists are small businesses. So they are not going to think it's acceptable to ship back an entire shelf full of plants. They need to sell every plant that they have in their store. So they're going to take really good care of them. A disadvantage with florists is that sometimes they don't have the selection you may want. They may stock only certain types of plants, those plants that we tend to think of for life events like weddings and funerals. Maybe peace lilies or croton or mums in the fall, things like that. So they may not have a selection of plants like some of our other stores, but if you have a really strong relationship with your local florist, which I would highly recommend, they can often order things for you. So develop that relationship, and if they don't have what you want, see if they can get it for you. Along that same line, your local greenhouses and nurseries are going to be great places to go. It's always good to have your sort of local plant person that you can go to. I'm actually lucky enough that in my community, I have a store that specializes in indoor plants. So I spend a good amount of my time and money there because I love being there. But your locally owned greenhouses and nurseries, they may not have a wide selection of indoor plants or may not have everything you want, but they're not only most likely going to be willing to get it for you or suggest where you can get it. They and your florist are going to be able to give you information about how to care for your plants. And that's something that you're going to be missing with some of those big box stores, is they can actually talk to you and say, okay, you don't like to water, here are some plants I would recommend. You have low light, here's something I would recommend for that situation. So those florists in the local greenhouses, if they have horticulture staff, they're not just going to sell you a plant, they're going to be able to talk to you about how to care for the plant, which I think is a huge advantage. And then hardware stores, not exactly big box stores, but maybe our neighborhood hardware stores. It's sort of an in-between a florist and a big box store, very similar to a grocery store. They too are likely just going to bring in a shipment of plants and have it on the shelf until it's sold. But some hardware stores, in my experience, do have maybe one staff member that is somewhat trained in horticulture. So that's kind of a middle ground there. The most important thing is that you're purchasing a quality plant to start with rather than trying to deal with a plant that's already dying or stressed. So when we talk about plant quality, what I mean is if it does not look healthy, don't buy it. And I have been there when you see a rack of plants that are 99 cents each, it is really difficult to walk away, but you should walk away. You get what you pay for. And if you buy something like this fern, it has some brown material in there. That's fine. That's pretty typical for ferns. But if you look at the color overall, it's very dull. It's not glossy. It's not dark green like we would expect to see a fern. And so if you bought that discounted maybe and took it home, maybe it would rebound, maybe it wouldn't, but you're going to spend a lot of your time trying to get it to look as good as something that you could have just purchased already healthy. If it's a flowering plant like the hyacinth in the middle here, definitely look for buds. So hyacinth we wouldn't traditionally consider to be indoor plants, but it would be something that we would buy seasonally, perhaps for Easter or in the springtime. And in those cases, you want to make sure that you have a budded plant, but not a bloom. That way, when you get it home, you're experiencing the full bloom yourself. And then you want to pay attention to light and water needs. You want to buy the plant for the space that you have. So if you have a really high light situation in your home or in the spot that you want to put a plant, you don't want to buy a plant that only needs low light. So in this case, with the Dracaena all the way off to the right, to me, this is a very highlight plant. It looks as though they sort of shoved it back in the shady corner, and the plant may live and it may do fine, but it's not going to thrive the way it would if you had selected a plant that's actually appropriate for that space. So now we're going to talk about culture, how to take care of your plants, which is 5 primary areas: the media, container, light, water, and nutrients. And I think a lot of times we get tripped up with indoor plants and only think about light and water, but all 5 elements are going to be really important to keeping your indoor plants happy and healthy. So media is so important for indoor plants, and I find when people are having problems, many times I can trace it back to the media or the container. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about both of those. Potting mix is what you want to get for your indoor plants. You don't want to use soil or compost. The reason being those tend to be very heavy and without a lot of airspace. And then the next question I always get is, so then why can plants in the landscape tolerate compost and soil? If you think about the landscape, you have insects and worms all working their way through the soil. You have neighboring plants whose roots are going out into the soil. You have rocks and sticks and all of these things that are creating airspace, where when you have a pot and it's an indoor plant, those things aren't happening. So you have to create airspace, you have to create drainage, and that's where the potting mix comes in. You want to make sure that it is disease-free, and what I mean by that is just to use it fresh. If I'm transplanting something or planting something new and I have a little bit of extra potting soil that's already been in a pot with a plant, I just add it to my compost pile. So I'm not throwing it away, not getting rid of it, but I don't want to reuse it on a house plant because it could cause problems. And then a lot of times our potting mix contains fertilizer, and that's just going to be important for you to look at. If it has a slow release fertilizer in it when you purchase it, that's great. That means that you're not going to have to fertilize for a while. But if you're transplanting cactus or succulents, you want to make sure that you're getting a mix specifically for those plants. Succulent mixes, and a lot of times it's called a cactus mix, have a lot more airspace, much more drainage, and almost no fertilizer. And all of those things are going to be really critical to keeping those plants happy. So a standard potting mix is appropriate for all of our indoor plants except for the cacti and succulents, and they should get their own special mix. The container is really important. I think the container, both design and function, is just as important as the plant you purchase. You may purchase a cactus because you don't want to water it and you put it in a container that doesn't have holes and you water it once and the cactus dies. So you need to make sure that the container is appropriate and also that it adds to the beauty of the plant. Maybe you just want to fill your home with indoor plants to improve your air quality, and that's great. But I like to have them because they're also beautiful. And so there's nothing that I hate more than when I bring home a brand new plant and it's in an ugly black plastic pot. The first thing I want to do is get it into something bright or something that makes me happy. I really like this little pig pot they have off to the right. I thought that was pretty precious. And I could see that if that was in my home, in a hallway or a bedroom, that walking by it every day, that would invoke a feeling of happiness because it's a precious little pig-shaped pot. So the first factor is drainage. If your pot does not have holes in it, you need to create drainage. So this cactus in the orange pot in the middle, it appears as though they took the pot that the cactus was in and actually put it down inside the orange pot. And that works well because if you water it, then you can remove the interior pot to make sure there's no water pooling in the bottom, which is how the majority of our indoor plants die, from overwatering, from sitting in water. If it's something that's not a traditional pot, like in the bottom left, you see that blue flower pot. To me, that looks like maybe a tin or something that maybe wasn't originally a pot. That would be something that you would want to drill holes in or put rocks in the bottom to create drainage. Now, the reason I don't always recommend putting rocks in the bottom of a pot is you can't check that. So you did create a small amount of drainage, but you're not going to pull that plant out every single time to make sure that there's not pooling water in the bottom. So my recommendation would be something to the right, those terracotta pots that have the trays in the bottom. You're going to water those cacti and then come back through, and if in an hour or so there's pooling water, you dump it and then put the tray right back. That way you know you're not overwatering those plants. You want to make sure that the pot is height appropriate for the plant height, just that it looks aesthetically pleasing. It's not a really tall pot with a teeny tiny little plant or vice versa. And then drainage again, how did that end up on here? I guess it probably ended up here because it's really important. Drainage is how most people kill their houseplants. So you want to make sure to plan for that. And then you want to make sure that the pot is appropriate for the size of the plant and to allow some room for growth. So typically our succulents and our cacti are very slow growing, so you could put them in a pot where they already look like they're filling the space pretty well. But something like maybe a ZZ plant, which we're going to talk about later, or pothos, you want to give it a little room to grow because it's going to grow fairly quickly and you don't want to have to transplant it right away. So here are a couple more examples of pots just to sort of get your mind going on some fun ideas for pots. I really like the red kind of coffee cup up in the upper right-hand corner. The reason I like that is it's clear that they set the pot down in there. They probably did not drill holes in the coffee cup, but because they set a container inside of it, they can check to see if they overwatered it. Also, I just think the idea of using a coffee cup is kind of fun and different. And then this is another idea if you're working on a little bit of a budget. I love that macrame is a thing again and that that's come back. But you can see here the bottom picture, it looks like they took a plastic pot that the jade came in and just set it inside of a basket. And then the upper right-hand picture, to me, that pothos looks like it's in like a jelly jar that's wrapped in twine. So you don't have to buy a really expensive pot or spend a lot of money on pottery to create something that really enhances the look of your indoor plant and makes it beautiful. Okay, light is really important, and where I find most of our clients get tripped up is they purchase a plant and stick it in a window and it's not the right amount of light. That's why you choose a plant for the space that you have, not the space for the plant that you have. So if you have a south window, that's going to be direct light, medium light, north window, or east-west. You can read through these, but as long as you're making sure that the plant is appropriate for the space that you have. A really good example is the home before where I'm living now was a rental, and the entire north side of the house, there were no windows on that side just because of the way it's laid out. So when I'm selecting plants, I know that most of my windows are going to be medium to high light, so I didn't select anything that was low light, knowing that I didn't really have the appropriate space for that. Water is another really critical factor. It's probably the most critical factor outside of making sure you select a container that is going to allow you to water appropriately. So when you water, you want to pay attention to plant type, and this is where it goes back to the purchasing again. When I worked for the greenhouse that sold to big box stores, the big box stores would send us plant labels for the plants that we were sending them. And there were 3 types of plant labels at what I will just say is a very well-known big box store. Low light, medium light, high light. That's it. There were no recommendations for water. There were no recommendations for any other kind of care. And it was up to us to say, okay, we're sending them this plant. We'll just put the low light tags on this. We'll put the medium tags on this, and we'll put the high tags on this. Sometimes the tags were not always correct. So you can't just rely on a tag that you get, a tag that sometimes doesn't even say what the plant is, to tell you how to care for it. And that's why having that relationship with a florist, with a greenhouse, with somebody that you can trust is really going to set you up to take care of these plants well. So you want to pay attention to plant type. Make sure that you have that drainage, which is everything that we talked about with the container. And then you want to group the plants by need. So I intentionally selected this photo because I don't think they're doing a very good job of that. If you look at the yellow fern, or the yellow container that has the fern in it, ferns typically need a good amount of water. And they set it right next to an aloe vera in the red pot that really should not be watered very much at all. I can guarantee you that that aloe vera would not be as big and beautiful as it is if they were watering it the same amount that they were watering the fern. So I think by grouping the plants like this, you're sort of setting yourself up for failure, and you'd be much better served to put that aloe vera in direct light in maybe a front room or a bedroom that you don't go into very often, so you're not tempted to overwater it. Whereas the fern might be great for a bathroom or a kitchen, somewhere that you're regularly going to see it and to remember to water it. And then drainage again. Other than the terracotta pot, none of these appear to have drainage, although it does look like maybe they're set on a tray. If there's holes in the bottom, maybe it goes out that way. But you really do have to set yourself up for success by allowing drainage. And then if you do have a tray, like in the terracotta pot in the photo, below it, about an hour after you water, if there's still water there, dump that excessive water and then put it back. Nutrients are pretty easy with houseplants. Like we talked about, if your potting mix is pre-amended with a slow release fertilizer, then just follow the bag's directions for when you need to begin using a fertilizer. Typically with many houseplants, I can get away with 6 months to a year without any problems with a fresh potting mix, which is another great reason that you want to use a fresh potting mix. When you do begin to fertilize, use a commercial mix. A 5-10-5 or 10-20-10 is adequate. Follow label directions and don't over fertilize. Most houseplants are going to be fine with minimum fertilization, and it's much easier to fertilize more if you're starting to see some deficiency issues than it is to try to take that back if you've over fertilized. A really common problem we see with houseplants is some salt buildup. A lot of times you'll see it on your terracotta pots, that sort of white crusty rim. So just use some distilled water, some fresh clean water, and leach the soil, sort of adequately soak that soil, which is another reason you want to have that drainage so that you can run more water through than the plant needs, and then throw away any water that leaches out the bottom. And then don't fertilize if you've just transplanted. If it has fertilizer in the mix, that's a really good way to burn those plant roots. So a couple other considerations. Temperature is important, but for the most part with our houseplants, they are going to be comfortable in the temperatures that we are comfortable with. One important factor is if you're going on vacation or you have a home that you only spend part of the year in, just to think about what the weather's going to be like for your plants. I have had calls from people before that went on a maybe Christmas vacation and turned the heat off in their home, or just turned it down very low so their pipes wouldn't freeze, but it was much too cold for their house plants. So think about your plants when you're traveling, or if you are maybe doing something that would cause you to turn off either your air conditioning or the heat in your home. And then just avoid placing those plants directly below vents or near any hot spots. Humidity can be an important factor for some houseplants. Orchids are a really good example. They enjoy a high humidity environment, but don't do what is in this photo. Do not go around with a water bottle and spray plant leaves. Doing so really does not affect the humidity around the plant. It just sort of wets the leaves for a while, and wet leaves can lead to diseases. So don't go around spraying plant leaves. I know that's a really common thing that people do. Instead, there are a couple other really easy things you can do to increase humidity. You can group plants together because they put off moisture, so they can help each other create sort of a humid microclimate. If you already have a humidifier in your home and you have a plant that needs high humidity, consider just placing it closer to that humidifier. You can also put it in a bathroom, especially if you have a common bathroom where a lot of people in your home are showering regularly. That can create enough humidity to keep the plants happy. But if all else fails, you can also get a dish and put some rocks in it and then put the plant on top of that in the pot. You just want to make sure that the bottom of the pot is high enough that it's not soaking up any of that water, because then again, we'll get into an overwatering situation. That would be the least desirable option, only because a dish of water can attract some insects and could grow algae or things like that. So you'd want to try to group plants or do some of those other methods first. And drainage, again, I just keep putting it in here, and I think it's because it's a really key thing that I want you guys to remember, that drainage is going to be critical for your houseplants. And then when it comes to cleaning the leaves, this is actually something that is important that we really don't have to do with our outdoor plants. So I wanted to make sure to mention it for our indoor plants. Periodically, just go through with a damp cloth and wipe those leaves off. They're going to get dusty. If you have animals like I do, they're going to get pet hair on them and dander. So just going through and wiping those plant leaves off is going to make sure that they're photosynthesizing at their highest ability, but also that they look nice, that they don't just look like, you know, a book on your shelf that's collecting dust. So finally, we're just going to talk about a few types of plants that I would recommend. This is a short list of a few universities' recommendations for the best plants to have inside. These also include NASA's best air purifying plants. The spider plant was very high on their list for air purifiers. But there's a few that I personally would like to recommend based on either their ease of care or just how awesome and cool they are. So I've mentioned pothos a couple of times, which is what's on the left-hand side, the epiprimnum. Pothos is a really broad name that encompasses a lot of different kinds of plants. So like I mentioned, my mom used to have the golden pothos. I'm certain she still has probably at least 12 plants in her house, which is a really easy to care for great plant, but I like to put a little bit of a spin on it. So I have a neon pothos, which is the top left-hand corner, and then right behind me I have that marble pothos. They're great vining living plants, so you can do a lot with them. You can train them up on a post in the middle of a pot. You can let them trail down a bookshelf or off of a piece of furniture. But I think the best part about pothos is that when it starts to dry out, it's going to wilt just a little bit. It's going to be pretty subtle if you can catch it early enough. But you can actually wait to water your pothos until it starts to wilt. And then when you see it wilt, water it, make sure you've got adequate drainage, and it's going to perk right back up. No worse for the wear. So I like to encourage people to start with pothos if they have not had success with houseplants in the past. You're going to see it grow really quickly, which is always really rewarding. Sometimes some of our houseplants just sort of sit there and you're not really sure if you're doing okay or not. So I think it's a great starter plant. And because it comes in so many different colors and patterns, you could have 6 or 7 and they're going to look like different plants. So you can sort of trick your not plant friends into thinking you're really good at keeping houseplants alive. And then Sansevieria is another really easy one. That's the top right-hand corner. As you can see, it comes in, those are just 4 options, but Sansevieria comes in a lot of different colors. And actually they have started to develop some breeds and train some so that they come in slightly different shapes as well. You can get some that almost look like little tubes, which I think is really neat. The best part about Sansevieria is you do not have to water it, hardly at all. I probably water my Sansevieria maybe once a month, probably closer to once every 2 months, and they're very, very happy. They can tolerate low light to high light. Just make sure that if you have it in a low light area of your home, you don't immediately put it in high light. That can really stress the plants out and you could lose leaves from that. So just to gradually transition if you want to move it to a different area in your home, or if you want to move it outside for the summer, same thing, just to gradually transition it. But Sansevieria are great because they can tolerate lots of light conditions and you can neglect them. So they're a great plant for a spare bedroom or an area of your home that you don't go very often. And then Echeveria are a type of succulent. I think that succulents are actually difficult for people who struggle with houseplants. So this would be something, if you've already had a lot of success with houseplants, maybe you step your way up to succulents. The reason I think they're difficult is you gain a lot of false confidence because they basically just sit there and look really cool. And then one time you overwater them and they're dead and there's no going back and there's no redemption. And unlike the pothos that's very forgiving when you neglect it, you overwater an Echeveria or another succulent one time and it's gone forever. So I think they're great if you're forgetful and if you're going to neglect it. But if you love plants through caring for them and watering them, it's a little bit of a challenge to neglect them as much as they need to be neglected. Professional succulent growers, they have a very specialized mix that's primarily sand. Typically, they water their plants 1 time per year. Now, they're providing just the perfect environment so they can get away with that. But that's just a bit of a testament to how little you need to water them. Most of my succulents, I water about once every 2 months, and that would be the most that I would water them. Any more than that, and you're just going to see the roots die right away, and then the plant will follow. So some other really fun ones, I'll start with the ZZ plant because it is, again, just a really easy plant to grow. If you think that you can't have a plant in your office because you don't have a window, get a ZZ plant. They tend to do really well on fluorescent lights. They need very, very little watering. I water it about as much as I water my Sansevieria, about once a month to once every 2 months. They're really neat. They can be quite expensive when they're this size, but you can get them very small and slowly grow them. But because they tolerate such low light conditions, they're really excellent for office plants. I see them a lot of times sort of on a high shelf because you don't have to water them very often. So they're really excellent plants to have if you're not experienced with houseplants. Monstera are sort of that middle level again. They're not super easy, but they're not much of a challenge either. I love them because of just the giant big leaves. It looks so tropical, and I think it's hard to look at a Monstera plant and not think that you want to be on like a tropical island or to picture yourself there. So they're a really cool plant, totally different than all of our other house plants. And as they've become more popular in recent years, they've done more breeding. So this is a really cool variegated monstera, and they're creating some smaller leaf and vining and different characteristics because they've been so popular. They're about mid-water as well. Some of the smaller leaf species you have to water a little more regularly, but because there's so much variety in between the monstera, definitely talk to your local florist or your greenhouse person or your extension agent about caring for a specific type of monstera if you decide to go in that direction. And then rattlesnake caletheia, if I was gonna pick like plant of the year, I think I would pick rattlesnake caletheia. I think I have 5 of them. And I always give them as housewarming presents and wedding presents and baby shower presents because I'm the weird person that gives plants as gifts all the time. But they're easy to care for and they just look really, really cool. So my favorite thing about the rattlesnake caletheia, which is totally different, if you're thinking I have a caletheia at home and it looks nothing like this, you're right. It's a completely different leaf shape and habit than our other caletheia. But the underside, the picture really doesn't do it justice, is a really dark, rich purple. And at nighttime, the foliage sort of closes up almost like a prayer plant. And then during the day, it opens up and the leaf is this really bright, glossy green with the dark green marks. So I think it's a really neat plant. It's about medium for water. Typically, I put my rattlesnake caletheia in the same room as one of my pothos, and then I water it about every other time my pothos needs water. It is one that if you overwater it a little bit, you're gonna lose some leaves, but the entire plant doesn't die. So I would say it's about medium as far as being forgiving, but it is a really, really neat plant, and it's one in about 1 million houseplants that we have out there, but I just wanted to show you that not everything is a traditional plant that you've seen for years and years. They're still coming out with really cool, neat, and interesting plants. And then finally, the most common houseplant in the United States is the poinsettia, and typically we see them in our homes around the holidays. And I always get calls from homeowners who say, my wife or my husband wants to have one of these plants, but we can't have them because they're poisonous to cats and dogs and children. And that is a complete myth. They are not poisonous. They do secrete latex if you break off the leaves. So if anybody in your home has a latex allergy, that could be a potential hazard. But what is important to remember with houseplants is when you're purchasing plants, you never know how they were treated. You don't know if they were sprayed with anything. You don't know if somebody in the days of COVID coughed all over it. You just don't know where it's come from. And then you don't know the substances in the plant. You don't know if I'm assuming most people don't know if their cats have latex allergies. So it's always a good idea to keep houseplants away from cats, from dogs, from children. Of course, for the plant's benefit, you didn't purchase the plant because you wanted your dog to eat it, but also just to keep everybody safe. So while I do want to stress that poinsettias are not poisonous, I also want to mention that it's never a good idea or okay to allow pets or children to eat these plants because you just never know when a particular person's going to have an allergy or when there's something on the plant. And then just to put in a plug for poinsettia, they have done a lot of really cool breeding in the last 10 years. There are beautiful pinks and whites and really neat patterns. So if you've been avoiding having one in your home because you were worried that it was going to harm somebody in your family, I highly encourage you to take a second look because they're really neat plants. So here are a few of the resources that I touched on or that I got some of my research from today. Like I said, I highly encourage you to check out the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture. It's a great resource rather, for research-based information about plants. And then if you don't already, you should definitely follow. This is my office's homepage. So this is different than the link that we're sharing in the bio. But thank you all so much for being with me today. And I will go ahead and stop sharing because I know we are going to transition to the question portion.
All right, well, thank you, Ariel, for sharing your knowledge on indoor plants. I know I found it very interesting and intriguing, and even though I'm a horticulturist myself, there's always new things that I learn. So thank you again for sharing. I'm sure other people learned just as much as I did. And I know we have a lot of questions to cover. So we're gonna begin our question and answer session, and we will answer as many questions as we can up until 1 o'clock. Remember again that if we can't get all of them fit in at this time, we will create a document with the questions and the answers that you can find later on our website. So without that, I will let Jason take over.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. So Ariel, yeah, we're going to start with a couple questions here regarding where you began with the benefits of plants and like in classrooms. Two sort of similar questions. How close to the students do the plants need to be? Any recommendation on that?
That's a good question, and I don't know that I have a recommendation specifically. The research definitely doesn't dive into it, but when I'm thinking about our traditional classroom spaces, I would say that it's possible to have a plant and have a student very far apart. So my recommendation would just be to try to put a few plants in different areas in the room so that you are getting as close to the students as possible. I definitely don't think it's necessary to have a plant on the student's desk. I don't think it has to be that close for you to see the benefits. But I think a good guide is wherever the student's sitting to have 1 to 2 plants in their eye line so that they can see those plants while they're learning.
Okay, great. Follow up to that question would be if the benefits of house plants are partially just visual, do you know if fake house plants have the same benefits?
I am so glad you asked this question. They do not. So while you can use fake houseplants as a decor item, and certainly you may get some benefits from that as far as looking at it, what they've shown is that you don't get the physiological and psychological benefits of even just looking at a houseplant as you do looking at a fake plant. And I think that's kind of a cool thing that they researched, because you would think that in your mind, a really nice fake houseplant would be the same as a real houseplant. But there's something in the human mind that can distinguish between the two, and you don't get the benefits from the fake houseplant.
Okay, awesome. A couple care-related questions. Someone uses rainwater for watering. A question on how do I address the salt buildup on my plants?
So you're not going to see the same salt buildup with rainwater. Typically, a lot of the time we get the salt buildup from our tap water because of what they treat the water with. But if you're still seeing some salt buildup using rainwater, just purchase. What I do is every couple months, I just purchase a jug of distilled water from the grocery store that I know doesn't have any salts or anything in it, and use that to leach the plant. And I don't know if I explained it very thoroughly, but when we're talking about leaching, it's not the amount that you would use to water. You are really running a large volume, not spraying it, but running a large volume of water through the soil, because the idea is to take those salts and to push them down through the soil. So it's a good amount of water, which is why you want to have that drainage so it can go out towards the bottom. But if you are seeing the salt build up with rainwater, treat it the same. Just purchase distilled water to leach.
Okay, perfect. So do you know anything about mixing mayonnaise and water to clean plants?
Yes. This was such a weird one that I heard growing up. My mom used to do this and I thought it smelled bad. You can do that, but it's not necessary. So what you're trying to do there is mayonnaise is oily. And so you're just trying to get that shine on your plants by adding that oil. So while you can do it, there's not a benefit to the plants. It's all about you. If you want that extra shine, that extra luster, you can do that. I tried it one time and I found it to be very messy, and that the sort of shine didn't last long enough for me to think it was worth the effort. So there's not any research that shows that mayonnaise is better or worse or benefits the plants. But personally, water just to remove that dust works really well, because then the plants have a shine that's all their own.
Okay, awesome. We've had several questions regarding plants and pets. And so folks are wondering, are there plants to avoid with pets? We had a question on cats and just pets in general.
Yeah, one of our specialists, Ward Upham, actually created a list that is poisonous plants for pets. It's not specific to house plants, it's just all plants, but I will find that and I will send that to Dr. Boyer to get on our website later today. So there is a list. My issue with the list is it doesn't take into account things that the plant has been treated with and your pet's allergies. So I have 2 dogs and they keep me busy. And I have had repeatedly one dog getting sick from eating weeds in the yard. Not that I have any weeds, I definitely don't. And the other one doesn't, eats the same thing. So it's just that individual pet's preference. And it's to the point where we've had to remove a specific weed because one of my dogs has been so sick. So while I'm happy to share that list, I just want to let you know that your pet may have a worse reaction just because of their individual needs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. A question regarding orchids. Are orchids in general kind of in their own category? Or is there any information to look for care of orchids?
They are tricky. I would say they are a houseplant, but they're a very challenging houseplant. The orchid industry has created information around orchid care with the intent that you would go to a grocery store, purchase an orchid, enjoy the bloom for a long time because orchid blooms last for such a long time. And then the way that they've sort of taught people to care for it, for example, using ice cubes to water, that's the correct amount, but you would never use ice cubes to water a plant as it can burn the roots. So sort of the culture around orchid care that orchid growers are putting out, they want that plant to die so that then you go buy more orchid plants. It's a good marketing technique. You want to buy more orchid plants. You can successfully keep orchid plants alive and get them to rebloom. I have done it 3 or 4 times. My preference is to maybe get an orchid to rebloom once or twice, but it takes such a long amount of time. I'm not interested in doing that for the rest of my life. It takes, for some orchids, light periods and dark periods. Certain types of orchids take a temperature change to trigger flowering. So orchids kind of are their own category as well. And again, I'd be happy to add some resources to the website about specifically caring for orchids.
Okay, perfect. Would you be able to touch on house plants and allergies? We had a couple questions regarding, do they release, pollen or even mold spores from the soil, that sort of thing that you'd ever worry about?
Absolutely. So it's kind of, again, a personal thing. There may be houseplants that don't cause allergic reactions for anybody, but maybe you're more sensitive. If you do have a lot of allergies or if you're worried about that, just stay away from plants that flower. So ferns, palms, snake plant, cactus, all of those things are either not going to flower or have very minimal flowers, and they would be very safe for something like that if you are sensitive to pollen. In regards to mold, if you are developing a mold on the top of your soil surface, you're probably overwatering. It may be a case where it's a high need plant, it needs a lot of water, in which case I would recommend maybe putting some stones or a little bit of a wood mulch on top just so that you're covering that soil. But plants reduce mold in the air. So there's mold spores all around us constantly, and plants actually take those in and reduce them. So overall, the benefits are going to outweigh any risk.
Okay, perfect. A couple latter questions that have come in here on aloe plants that have been put in potting soil and taken outside and not happy. So what do you recommend on keeping those aloes looking good outdoors?
Aloe is kind of a tricky one. They are a little bit, they're definitely succulent, but they can't always be treated totally like a succulent. So I would recommend using a potting mix that's part potting mix and then mixing in a succulent or a cactus mix for the soil itself. But typically when I hear that plants have been inside and then they went outside and they're not happy, the first thing I think is that the transition was too quick. So I've been guilty of this as well. You get spring fever, you're really excited, you maybe start to transition your plant and move them outdoors. But with something like aloe, it's very slow growing. So you have to think that it's creating new cells and dividing very slowly. So if you want to move your plant from indoors to outdoors, that's a process that could take weeks. depending on the highlight situation that it's been put in. So if you're having problems because you moved a plant outside, it's probably because it was too quickly, and I would try to put it maybe more in shade or in a little bit cooler temperature, because if it's outside right now, it's hot, it's muggy, and it could be in full sun. So just try to do that transition a little bit slower and see if your plant rebounds. The other problem with aloe is that it's slow to respond. So you may see it respond today, but think, oh, well, I've had it outside for 3 weeks and it was fine. Well, it was stressed on that first day, but it just isn't showing it until today.
Okay. So I think you've kind of already answered this question as well, but what about bringing plants inside that have been potted but outdoors for nice weather? So reverse that basically.
Yeah, very similar. You just want to do that transition slowly. So what you don't want to do is wait until we have a frost and then bring everything inside. You want to anticipate our fall season, which typically lasts 1 to 2 hours in Kansas, and start that transition so that you're moving your plants maybe on a covered porch, or maybe inside only in the evenings and then back outside during the day, just to help them transition slowly.
Perfect. Question on the plant behind your left shoulder. Is that a parlor palm?
It is a pygmy date palm.
Okay. And they were wondering how you keep it healthy.
It's actually pretty easy to keep healthy. It requires quite a bit of watering, so I water it about once a week. Most palms need phosphorus. They tend to get brown tips if they don't have enough phosphorus, so I do make sure to fertilize it more so than I fertilize my other plants. And then you can't see it because I've closed it, but I have a nice window behind me that has really nice bright light. So I do keep it there. Occasionally I move it out from behind my filing cabinet to the end of my desk so it gets a little bit more light. So maybe every couple of weeks I move it out and then I move it back, but I like to have it behind me because it makes me happy.
Perfect. Another care question. Is there a preference that you have on bottom watering versus top watering? Either one better?
That's a great question. I don't, as long as the way you water isn't watering the foliage. So I don't ever want to get my leaves wet when I'm watering. But as long as you're not getting your leaves wet, you can water at the bottom or you can water at the top, as long as you're just wetting the soil and not the plant itself.
Okay, so on succulents, would that bottom watering be preferred, do you think?
I do, because typically my succulents sort of grow out and they make it difficult for me to get to the soil without watering them. And particularly with succulents, water can pool and cause little areas of rot. So definitely with succulents, if you don't have a patch of soil that you can actually put the water on, if the succulent takes up that whole surface, you should water from the bottom.
Okay, perfect, great. Question on the plant shining. So when we shine our house plants, do those products diminish the photosynthetic ability of the plant?
There hasn't been a lot of research on that. I looked prior to this only because those products weren't intended to be used long term. They're products that were created for florists and for people in the greenhouse industry. The day you're going to buy your plant, they're going to shine it up and send it out the door so it looks nice and glossy and happy for you. So they're not, the intention of the product is not for every day to you spray your plants and keep them shiny. So my recommendation, I haven't seen any detrimental effects, but it's not a product that I use regularly. If you're using a plant for something really important, like maybe you want to put it in a family photo or a wedding, you're using it as decor, I highly recommend using something like a palm for wedding decor. I think those are the best weddings. Definitely, that's a great opportunity to use a leaf shine, get it nice and shiny and beautiful, but it's not something I would recommend just in your home using every day.
Okay. Perfect. We had another question on aloe vera about leaves falling over. Is that a pretty common problem on those, or anything you can do there?
It can be. It's probably related to water. So I've seen really common where aloe are overwatered, and what'll rot first is the bottom of the leaf, and the plant wants to get rid of one leaf rather than die entirely itself. So sometimes you'll see the bottom rotted. So if you are having one fall off, look and see if the bottom's mushy. And then the other thing I've seen is underwatering. So if the leaf that falls off is really dry and crispy at the bottom, it's probably underwatered. If it's mushy at the bottom, you probably overwatered it at some point. And like I said before with aloe, they're slow to react. So you may have overwatered it 3 weeks ago and the plant is just now responding.
To orchids, but is there any specific resources on bonsai that you use, or I mean, do you have anything to say about bonsai, I guess?
Not really. Bonsai are sort of their own thing. They are a plant that's kept in the house, but they're not a true house plant. Usually they're a landscape or ornamental plant that has been trained to be small. I would say on the plant difficulty level, bonsai is the top of the heap. We have a lot of people come into our office with bonsai problems that have spent a lot of money on plants that are struggling. So they're very, very difficult to keep happy in my opinion and experience. I've never paid for one because I like cheap plants sometimes.
Yes, there you go. So we've had a couple questions on pests like mealybugs or fungus gnats, common pests on houseplants. Any quick tips?
With the fungus gnats, definitely just watching the moisture, making sure that the plant dish, if your water's pooling into that, that you're emptying that. They tend to happen. Where there are houseplants, typically there are some fungus gnats, but moisture is going to be key, just trying to keep down on that. The most important thing with fungus gnats is while they are annoying, they are not harmful to your plants. So that's a question we get a lot, not to worry about. Mealybugs, aphids, some of those other ones that are really common, you're going to have to treat based on the plant, and we have a great plant problems page. If you just look up KSRE plant problems, you'll be able to see some of those. With house plants, just keeping your eye on them and catching the pest population when it's small. The really difficult situations to handle are when one plant has a pest problem and you didn't notice it, and now it's on all of your house plants. So just trying to keep an eye on it. If you notice a plant that has a pest problem, isolate it. If you can't figure out a way to control it, contact your local extension agent and we'll help you with that. But just make sure that it doesn't spread to all your plants while you're trying to control it.
Okay, perfect. Well, I believe we are now at 1 o'clock. There are a few other fairly specific questions, so we might save those and we can respond to those as we can with the resources with this video. So I'll turn it back to Lauren. Is there anything else we need to do to close out?
No, and I was just going to say thank you to everyone who joined today. Again, this was hosted by K-State Research and Extension. We're so glad that you could be here to learn about indoor plants for the health and happiness of ourselves. We do have several other webinar series coming up, so be sure to visit our website to see all of our upcoming topics and register beforehand so that you can join the meeting on time and get the email afterwards, and just be prepared. The session will be recorded and posted by tomorrow afternoon, so if you didn't get a question answered, we will have that question and answer document on our website, which again, we will email you afterwards, and that'll have a link that you can follow to find the survey and the question and answer document. I think that's all we have. If you need anything else, please don't hesitate to contact us at ksuemg@ksu.edu. Thank you again and have a great week. We'll see you next week.